My sister has spent years turning a blind eye to her kids' increasingly criminal behavior, constantly making excuses while they vandalize property, steal, and terrorize the neighborhood. After countless warnings and sleepless nights, I finally had enough. I called the cops, and now the entire family is furious with me for betraying them. My younger brother, who is 28, and I at 32 were brought up by our father 56 since our middle school years. Throughout that time, my father consistently showed favoritism towards my brother, and I eventually grew accustomed to this dynamic. I was never the son my father envisioned, as I lacked any interest in sports or the traditionally masculine pursuits he enjoyed. Instead, I leaned towards activities often considered more feminine, making me quite the mama's boy during my childhood. My passions included everything related to cooking, reading, and even singing. My father attempted to engage me in football, but I simply wasn't skilled, leading to a gradual drift in our relationship. My brother, however, perfectly embodied my father's ideal son. He was a robust and adventurous boy, unafraid of getting messy during play or even sustaining minor injuries. He was the quintessential son for my father, and it was strikingly clear that my father held far deeper affection for him than he did for me. He would always speak glowingly of my brother but rarely of me. My mother, conversely, never showed favoritism. She treated both of us equitably, which is why I felt a stronger bond with her. I did try to cultivate a friendship with my father and spend time with him, but once our distance had become established, he showed little inclination to mend our fractured connection. Tragically, the person who served as the emotional anchor for our dysfunctional family, my mother, passed away when I was in 8th grade. She had been battling cancer, and by the time her condition was fully understood, it was too late for any intervention, and she was gone before we could truly grasp it. My mother's death utterly shattered me, and I experienced a period of profound distress. My only refuge during that time was the kitchen. I would invent a new dish daily, as if my very existence depended on it. My mother was an exceptional cook, and she often confided that had she not been compelled to inherit her father's business, she would likely have pursued a career as a chef. Therefore, culinary creation became my sole source of comfort, particularly as my father and brother offered no assistance in processing my emotions. They suppressed any emotional responses they might have had to my mother's passing and, if anything, became even more remote from me. In typical families, such a tragedy would draw people closer. My intense focus on cooking further irritated my father, and he would relentlessly pester me to get out of the damn kitchen and engage in manlier activities. One day, at the peak of his frustration, he declared that if he found me in the kitchen again, he would assign me all the other household chores. He commanded me to emulate my brother and man up, which ignited a fierce argument during which I tearfully asserted that he had never loved me, and to my shock, he concurred. The truth was finally out in the open, and I believe that marked the last occasion my father and I communicated with such candor. Following that, I ceased all efforts to gain his approval, and he in turn seemed completely indifferent. For the subsequent years, I spent every available moment in my room, immersed in music and diligently studying new recipes. I was resolute in my mission to make this culinary ambition a reality, not only for myself but also as a tribute to my mother. Meanwhile, my father and I conversed only when absolutely necessary. My brother, too, largely disregarded me, mirroring our father's indifference. Consequently, after my mother's death, I felt profoundly alone. Eventually, when it was time to apply to colleges, I decided to submit applications to several top culinary institutions, alongside traditional universities, to ensure I had various options. I was uncertain if my father would approve, but I felt compelled to try. That summer, I had already secretly completed an internship at a restaurant, gaining valuable experience and securing a recommendation letter, which proved immensely helpful. As a result, I received acceptance into several of the schools I applied to, including one of the most prestigious located in France. I was elated that this opportunity was finally materializing, yet equally apprehensive about seeking my father's permission. I had already resolved to plead with him if he showed any reluctance, as I was absolutely determined to make this happen for myself. I was unwilling to abandon my aspirations under any circumstances. So, I eventually informed my father about my acceptance. While I anticipated his rejection, perhaps citing it as an unmasculine profession, I was entirely unprepared for his outright refusal to cover my tuition. I vividly recall my confusion when he stated he wouldn't contribute to my education whatsoever, especially since my father was far from financially strained. In fact, he was quite affluent and could easily afford to send me to France. However, money was not the impediment to his willingness to pay for my tuition. It was the concern that attending such a renowned school in France would foster insecurity in my younger brother, who was already struggling academically and having difficulty concentrating. My father's proposition was that I either attend community college or find a way to fund my own education. I was aghast that he would inflict such cruelty upon his own son and found myself speechless. I attempted to articulate my desperate need for this opportunity, but he remained unyielding and completely unwilling to pay. He even declared that my brother's well-being was his paramount concern, and that he did not want me competing with his son. I could scarcely believe this was unfolding, as I couldn't fathom any other parent in the world crushing their child's dreams solely for the sake of a favored one. After extensive pleading and tearful entreaties, when he still refused to budge, I engaged in a heated confrontation with him, uttering many painful words before leaving his house for good. I subsequently moved in with my maternal aunt, my mother's elder sister. My earlier reluctance to move was due to the comfort I found in the home where I had grown up with my mother, and my desire to avoid changing schools, which would have been necessary given my aunt's considerable distance from my high school. I confided in her about my father's flat refusal to pay my tuition and expressed my need for her assistance. It felt dreadful to ask her for such a substantial sum, as she was not as wealthy as my father, but she reassured me that she would somehow manage all my expenses. Through her efforts, she successfully rallied her friends to contribute, enabling me to attend the culinary school of my dreams, for which I will forever be grateful. Once enrolled, I also worked part-time, striving to maximize my time there to make every penny invested in me worthwhile. I labored tirelessly and ascended through the ranks. Upon graduation, I was recognized as one of the most proficient chefs and secured a job just a few months later. I began working at a prestigious French restaurant, consistently sending half of my salary back to my aunt to gradually repay my debt. I was fortunate not to rely on student loans, as I might never have been able to clear them otherwise. I continued working in France for several years before finally returning home, having saved enough to establish my own restaurant. A couple of years have passed, during which I worked as head chef at another local restaurant, while simultaneously pursuing my ambition of opening my own establishment. All the preparations were finalized a few weeks ago, and I was finally able to inaugurate the restaurant I had tirelessly worked towards for so long. 2 friends from my time in France also joined my venture as co-owners, and I was especially thankful when they allowed me to choose the restaurant's name. As they were from the same region, we all agreed to open our restaurant in my chosen city. I decided to name it after my mother, which proved to be a fortunate coincidence for us, as her name is quite unique and beautiful in our home city. Everything was finally falling into place. A few days prior, we even hosted a small pre-opening party for a select group of guests before our official business launch. Naturally, I invited my aunt and several of her friends who had contributed to my tuition. I also extended invitations to some school friends, but that was essentially the extent of the guest list. My father and brother were not invited for obvious reasons. Even if I had wanted to, it would have been impossible, as I had not spoken to them since leaving home, nor had they ever attempted to re-establish contact. I suppose we were all better off that way. However, I should have anticipated that they would eventually appear to capitalize on my success, and that is precisely what transpired at the party we organized. They arrived an hour before the scheduled start but were not stopped by security, as we share a surname, and they claimed they were there to surprise me. That much at least was true. I was definitely surprised to see them. My father and brother greeted me as if nothing unpleasant had ever occurred, exhibiting a warmth I had probably never experienced from them in my entire life. I was so taken aback that I simply froze when they entered the restaurant. My friends, noticing my discomfort, politely acknowledged my family before leaving us to ourselves, for which I am grateful. I was still reeling from the shock of their appearance when they dropped another surprise, presenting me with a gift. It was a portrait of my mother, and my father even stated that he had commissioned it for me to display in my restaurant as soon as he learned that a new, elegantly named establishment was opening in our city. He claimed he had immediately known it could be none other than his son's venture and asserted that he had always known I had it in me. My brother, too, joined the chorus of praise, declaring his immense pride in me. I could not believe my ears and instantly sensed that something was amiss. I remained largely silent, anticipating their true agenda, as I was certain there was a specific reason for their presence. I allowed them to speak, and eventually they revealed their purpose. Apparently, my brother was now working as a bartender, a position he secured only because my father had persuaded a friend to employ him at his club. My brother's grades had declined consistently throughout high school and college, preventing him from attaining the high-paying positions my father had always expected. Moreover, he had also been slacking during his high school football games, which meant he couldn't secure a sports scholarship. Ironically, he was the one who ended up attending community college, having been rejected everywhere else. Their proposal to me was to make my brother a partner in the business, thereby granting him a more respectable standing, despite his complete lack of contribution or merit. I felt an overwhelming urge to laugh in their faces but somehow managed to restrain myself, instead telling them I would consider it. I had no intention of considering it. I simply didn't want to dismiss them outright. I wanted them to remain for the party because I had a far more effective strategy to humiliate my family, who had emerged from obscurity the moment they caught wind of my success. They seemed reasonably pleased, but they had no inkling of what was about to unfold. After a short while, our guests began to arrive, and within approximately an hour, everyone we had invited was present. I spent the evening mingling, as did my father and brother, and I even overheard them boasting about me to a few individuals, marveling at their sheer audacity. As the party drew to a close, it was time for the hosts, my partners, and me to offer a toast. My friends spoke first, as I wished to reserve the most impactful moment for last. Finally, it was my turn to speak, and on that day, I was determined to express myself fully. I began by thanking all my guests and raised a glass first to my mother, acknowledging her as the foundational reason for my achievements. I firmly believe that her childhood faith in me had instilled the self-belief necessary for any of this, a conviction that remained with me even after her passing. Having paid my respects, I decided to address the uncomfortable truths. I recounted how I had to secure a loan from my aunt and her friends to attend culinary school, and expressed my profound gratitude to her. Then, I finally articulated the underlying reason for needing that tuition loan: my family. I spoke of growing up with a father who never showed love or belief in me, constantly criticizing my feminine interests like cooking, and a younger brother who was a carbon copy of our father. I shared with everyone how my father had refused to fund my tuition, fearing that I would surpass his golden child brother in success, which ultimately led to me leaving home. Yet, despite these formidable obstacles, I had managed to rise and become the person I am today. In a sense, I acknowledged they deserved some credit for creating the challenges I faced, for without them, I might never have discovered my own resilience. Many guests directed intensely disapproving gazes at my father and brother as I spoke, and even they had the decency to at least appear abashed, though I knew they felt nothing of the sort. I then approached my father and brother and embraced them, mimicking the same feigned warmth they had displayed upon their arrival earlier that day. Two could certainly play this game. I publicly announced that, because they had chosen to celebrate my success that day, I had forgiven them for past events and was even prepared to offer my brother the position of bartender at my restaurant. To others, this undoubtedly appeared to be a genuine emotional reconciliation, and they ended up applauding at the conclusion of my speech, with a few enthusiastic cheers. Only my family and I understood that this was nothing more than a calculated act of humiliation, which I had executed quite successfully. Yet, they were compelled to smile and feign immense gratitude, unable to storm out in anger, despite their obvious desire to do so. After a while, once the crowd had dispersed and it was time for us to depart, my father and brother confronted me directly outside my restaurant. They were livid, and I swear I saw angry tears welling in my brother's eyes. They demanded an explanation for my actions, asserting that if I had never intended to make my brother a partner, I should have simply turned them away upon their arrival. I merely chuckled and informed them that this was my way of repaying them for everything they had done to me over the years, and that this was precisely what they deserved. I then walked away, not bothering to look back, even as I heard my brother crying about how cruel I was and my father yelling after me that I would regret this. But I was already in my car driving away and I felt nothing. That incident occurred a couple of days ago, and I haven't heard from them since. My aunt believes I might have gone too far and should have simply dismissed them at the outset, but I disagree with her. This was entirely deserved. Update 1. I have decided not to contact my family to apologize, despite my aunt's assertion that I was excessively harsh. I feel no remorse for my actions and therefore, I will not pretend otherwise or go out of my way to convey it. They had the opportunity to apologize to me during their visit, but they chose not to. I explained this perspective to my aunt as well, and while she still maintains that I shouldn't have done what I did, she hasn't pressed the issue much. I suppose this is simply an area where we have agreed to disagree, and I am perfectly content with that. On another note, my brother has been diligently spreading malicious rumors about me among our old school friends. It's unfortunate that we attended the same high school, as this means random acquaintances are now messaging me to verify the fabricated stories, that I humiliated and then ejected my father and brother from my restaurant after intentionally serving them 3-day-old food. Yes, he exaggerated the narrative to portray himself as the victim, which is entirely predictable. Ordinarily, I wouldn't concern myself with petty gossip, but I do not want these rumors influencing potential customers. Therefore, I have texted my brother, warning him that if he doesn't cease disseminating falsehoods about me and my restaurant, I will ensure he loses his current job. I am hopeful this will be effective, as I truly do not wish to deal with their unnecessary antics right now. I am incredibly busy with work and this is simply not the time. Update 2. My brother texted back stating he would only stop if I made him a partner. I cannot fathom the level of idiocy and delusion this represents. Furthermore, if he desires to be a partner, isn't it incredibly foolish of him to be disparaging the very restaurant he wishes to join? I am almost certain this is my father's strategy to secure a prominent position for his favored son without any genuine effort, but regrettably, it will not succeed with me. I have informed him that if he persists, he will be hearing from my lawyers, and that he is in no position whatsoever to negotiate with me at this moment. The only reason I haven't taken immediate action is my desire to avoid unnecessary drama, but I will certainly retaliate severely if he attempts any more foolishness after this. He should consider this my final warning. I truly hope he heeds it for his own benefit. Update 3. So everyone, it has been approximately a month since my last update, and due to being exceptionally busy, I haven't had the chance to fill you in on subsequent events. My brother did cease spreading rumors about me behind my back, but my family remained quite desperate to benefit from my success. Consequently, my father, accompanied by my brother, visited my house a few weeks ago, ostensibly to intimidate me. They arrived threatening to sue me for using my mother's name for my restaurant, claiming they had already consulted a lawyer and implying that if I wished to avoid trouble, I needed to make my brother a partner as soon as possible. Naturally, I immediately recognized their bluff, as no reputable lawyer would entertain such a frivolous case. I believe they overlooked a crucial detail. She was my mother too, not solely his wife, and as far as I am concerned, no law could prevent me from honoring her name. By that point, I had endured enough of their nonsense. I told them that if they did not leave me alone, they would be forcing my hand, leaving me with no option but to contact the authorities. My brother lost his composure at that moment and attempted to grab me by the collar, but fortunately, my father restrained him. I suspect the relentless humiliation had finally pushed him over the edge, causing him to snap. Well, it was not my fault, and they were fortunate that I did not call the police right then and there. I instructed my father to leave, but he merely told my brother to go calm down in the car, stating he wished to speak with me privately. After my brother departed, he attempted to manipulate me by suggesting that if my mother knew what I was doing to them, she would be deeply distressed, and that I should bury the hatchet. At this point, I told him to leave me alone, as even I had reached my breaking point. He could not simply exploit my mother's memory to get his way. That was a truly contemptible tactic. And to be honest, we were far past any prospect of reconciliation. Neither of them had ever apologized to me, not once, so I genuinely failed to comprehend why they expected my forgiveness without even requesting it. As for my mother's potential feelings, I am certain she would have felt equally let down when my father refused to pay for my tuition, and for that matter, every single time he made me feel worthless. Therefore, he is the absolute last person qualified to lecture me about what my mother would or would not approve of. I know she is proud of me wherever she is, and nothing my father says will ever alter that conviction. At least my restaurant is flourishing, and I am hopeful that we will be able to expand soon enough.